Hey everybody, it's Ellie here once again, and today I want to talk about Flask, a roguelike Autobattler from Chop Chop Games, published by Ghost Ship Publishing. It caught my attention immediately for being extremely strange and honestly pretty unique, at least in art style. The full game doesn't have a release date yet, but there's a playable demo right now, and this is one of those cases where the trailer alone is reason enough to download and try it out. You play a debt-ridden alchemist in a post-medieval dark fantasy world, piloting a leased mobile tower and trying to pay off what is basically a terrible tower mortgage. You do that by sending homunculi out into danger to harvest green monster blood. You're a questionable business owner here and the mastermind behind the whole operation, building little artificial meat puppet soldiers, pointing them at the horrors and hoping they bring back enough blood to keep the lights on. It's a setup that could easily just be a joke, but Flask plays it straight enough to give it a real identity. The story is simple. The Goblin Gate opened, monsters poured through, and the world built an entire frontier economy around monster blood. It's the resource, the reward, and the thing that keeps the whole greedy machine moving. Even before the mechanics start explaining themselves, the look is what grabs you. Flask has a scratchy, grotesque hand-drawn style based on the work of John Ken Mortensen, who's also the game's art and narrative lead. It gives the whole thing a strong visual identity. The creatures have a stiff papercraft feel. Enemies look rotten and miserable. Homunculi look assembled out of parts, and everything sits in the sturdy green and black palette that makes the blood economy feel even more unpleasant. But it's not all grim. There's a crooked sense of humor running underneath, with gross little freaks, bizarre merchants, dramatic voice lines, and screaming combat sounds. Everything feels awful and a little absurd at the same time, and that balance keeps a genuinely grimy world from becoming exhausting to look at. Flask isn't about direct control once a fight starts. Combat is automatic, so the real game happens beforehand. Each homunculus has flask slots arranged along a timeline, and those flasks are its actions. Strikes, blocks, buffs, poisons, and stranger effects as the run opens up. Combat triggers them left to right, then repeats. Simple enough on its own, but the flask order is where the system gets interesting. A damaged flask by itself is fine. However, a buff placed before it is already something more, and a flask that guarantees a hit before a gamble-based attack starts to feel like a real build. A flask that applies vulnerable right before another character swings turns the whole party into a well-oiled machine. That's what makes Flask feel closer to a roguelike deck builder, similar to Slay the Spire, than a grid-based Autobattler. You're not placing units on a board and hoping the positioning works. You're programming small chains of actions, then watching whether the timing holds up once the enemy's own chain starts messing up your plans. The demo opens things up gradually, and I felt the game is relatively easy to learn. Basic strike and block logic first, then new flasks from shops, then elements, then snacks for permanent boosts, then homunculus classes with their own flask pools, and eventually organs and items that bend the rules further. The element system is one of the earlier layers that made buildcrafting fun for me. Flasks carry elemental symbols, and stacking enough of the same one unlocks team bonuses. Blood heals the team when enemies lose health. Sun boosts the power of early slots. Wind repeats flask activation at reduced power. Crystal delays and softens incoming damage. It took me a while to notice that you can purchase these in the shop too. And speaking of shops, these aren't just background stat bumps, they push you to think about which flask you're buying even when its direct effect may not be the main reason you want it. That creates real competition for your precious blood in shops. Sometimes you want a flask because the action is strong, sometimes because it completes an element bonus, and sometimes because you're just curious whether the wording means what you think it means. The homunculi themselves feel like separate build drivers, which is important. The run I played started with a straightforward frontline unit, added a rogue-style character, then a ranger. Class separation means not every flask fits every homunculus. Some are neutral, but most belong to specific character types, so you're not drawing from one shared pile. You're thinking about what each unit can actually do, how their timelines line up, and whether they're supporting each other or silently wasting each other's setup. The Ranger is a good example. Its bullet system takes a moment to understand, since it layers gaining bullets, boosting their value, and firing them together. Once it actually works, it plays like its own little engine: load, improve, fire in a burst. Add certainty or gamble effects, and that character has a completely different rhythm from the simpler strike and shield opener. The best builds in Flask show up when a unit stops feeling like a bundle of stats and starts feeling like a weird contraption, one stacking bursts and shields, another spreading buffs to allies, another loading up a shot, another locking enemy flasks or spreading poison. Combat runs itself, but the construction is all yours. Other players' homunculi will show up on your path during a run, and it's one of the more interesting ideas here, because it surprises you without turning the game into a live competitive Autobattler. There's no meta to manage, no aggressive balancing or matchmaking. Someone else's build just shows up as a ghostly rival, and tests whether your own build actually holds together, or if one of your tower's windows will get broken again. Difficulty seems a bit spiky at the moment. A lot of fights were decently easy, but some were death traps. It seems that some homunculi archetypes are quite a bit stronger than others too, so this will need some tweaking and a balanced pass until its full release. Another thing I'd like to see improved is readability. Some icons and tooltips are really small and hard to read, at least for me, and especially on the map and shop screens, and a few mechanics needed extra explanations before I understood them. Class ownership on flasks, bullet phrasing, keywords, certain effect timings. Combat feedback could use some sharpening too. When Flask is really firing on 3 versus 3 homunculi matches, shields, burns, poison bullets, and element triggers can all be going off at the same time. And that complexity is part of the appeal. But it needs stronger audio and visual cues, so the important moments don't get lost in the noise. There are also some missing or inconsistent sound effects around a few characters and mechanics. None of this hurts the core appeal, but if the full game ships with hundreds of flasks and dense interacting builds, clarity is going to matter just as much as variety. As a first impression, Flask isn't only interesting because it looks strange, though it absolutely does, but the weirdness does carry into the systems too. That gives the game a stronger identity than I initially expected, an Autobattler that doesn't feel like it's chasing the obvious version of that genre, like the bizarre or teamfight tactics. But it's closer to a roguelike deck builder with the deck split across a team of unstable little creatures, each running its own combat script, and I think this is one to keep an eye on if you like strange roguelikes, autobattlers, deck builders, or games where the buildcrafting slowly turns into a machine that you barely understand by the end but are deeply proud of. Release date is not available yet, but if you're keen to start mixing some potions too, you can try out the demo that's available on Steam and wishlist the game. Let me know what you think of it, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.